Alright, so today we're going to be doing an introduction into Visual Studio. Now I'll be demonstrating on the 2019 version, which is available free from Microsoft. However, if you're on a school computer, chances are you've got 2015. Now, once you're actually into the coding, it's nearly identical. However, there are some cosmetic and layout differences when you are creating your projects. So you'll have to, if you're on 2015, you'll have to use some um, problem-solving skills or common sense to create the project. It's extremely similar, but not quite the same. Now, first of all, we're going to create a new project, which will bring up a menu that looks like this. Now, what we want is something called Windows Forms. So we can just search Windows Forms. We actually get two results for Windows Forms. So we have Windows Forms app.net framework and we have Windows Forms app.net. Now the .net version is written in Visual Basic. We don't want that one. We can see how it says Visual Basic there. No likey. We want the C# version, which is the Windows Forms app.net framework. So just click that one, and then we can click Next. Now we've got this screen where we can give our project a name. So let's call it Visual Studio Demo. Now, if you're on a school computer, you will have to change this location to be your U drive. So if you can just hit the 3-dot button and then navigate to your U drive, and then save it into a reasonable folder in your U drive. You will be using this tutorial, this project again for subsequent tutorials, so it is important that you keep it. Now, if you're on a BYOD or a home computer, then you can leave this more or less as is. Visual Studio chooses a reasonably sensible place to put all of its projects by default, so it'll be alright if you leave it as default. Just make sure you give it a decent name. Alright, so now that we've done that, we can hit create. That creates the project, and actually, you'll see it in a sec, brings us into our design view, as we'll call it. Now you'll see a few things to start with. On the left we have our toolbox. If you don't have it, it might be docked in the side. So see how I've closed it down there and we've got that little blue white toolbox. Click it and then hit the pin. It's where all of the control items for the Windows Forms user interface come from. So we will be using that quite a lot. On the right side, we have the Solutions Explorer and the Properties tab. Now the Solution Explorer is basically like a system tree of everything that's inside your program. So we can actually open them up and look at them. So don't really need most of that stuff except for the actual forms itself. Now, just close that. You guys won't be seeing that yet. Now, whenever you're creating a form or a project, or even just an item on a form, you actually have to name it immediately. Once you start to put code into forms, it is exceptionally unwise to try and change the names. It can be done, but it can also break the code. So it is best to name any items immediately. Now, in the case of forms, we can do that by right-clicking in our Solution Explorer on the form, click rename, and for our form today we're going to call it main. Click it off. It will throw up a message saying you are renaming a file. Would you also like to perform a rename in this project of all references to the code element form 1? Now we need to hit yes here. If you hit no, it will actually break everything. So click yes. There we go, we've changed it to main. Now, if we click our form, I'm going to drag it a little bit bigger, we can actually see that the properties tab down the bottom right populates with all the properties for this form. So we can see, for instance, its name, main, see, name, main, name, main. Scroll down, there's a bunch of stuff, size, text. In this case, we want a text, change it to main. But there is a bunch of other stuff, and after the end of this tutorial, I suggest you take a look in here and try changing the form color, try changing the various settings of the form, and see what you can do, make the form do. Just to get familiar with the properties. I'm not going to take you through all of them today. There are too many properties, but you can see them in there. Okay, fair enough? So the first thing I want you to do is, in the toolbox on the left side, I want you to search for GroupBox. Actually, before we do that, I will say, anyone that doesn't have Toolbox, or has accidentally closed Toolbox, or Solution Explorer, or Properties, or anything like that, if you just pop up to the View menu, you can actually find all of the various user interface attachments and menus and such here. If you don't have Toolbox, press View, like so, and then press Toolbox. For an example, I want the error list, and you guys might want that as well if you haven't got it. So I'll click on View, and then click the error list, and that'll make the error list come up. Okay? So now that's this bottom fellow here. Now, first things first, let's add a group box to our form. So if we just click our toolbox and then search group box, there it is. Drag that on. Give it some size. Might make our form a little bit bigger. Give it some size. And we'll name this, or we'll give this one the text variable demos. Like so. Now what I'd like you to do is, if we can grab a button and drag a button into this, size it appropriately. Button from the toolbox, of course. And now we'll go into the Properties tab and find the name for this button. So under the name tag, and we'll change the button's name. Now the button's name here is how we refer to the button in code, and it is extremely important. The default names are terrible, and you will have to change the name of every interface element you actually intend to use. So in this case, we want to change the name to btn deck. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Deck var. Now, whenever you're giving anything a name, and this includes as declaring variables or all naming inside Visual Studio or in code and generally, we never use a capital for the start of a name or anything else. The reason being is that if you do use a capital, it can be confused with other things in code, such as like built-in commands and the like, and it can get a touch confusing. Now, every second word after that, every other word, should have a capital at the start of it. So BTN, that stands for button, deck, that stands for declaring, and var, that stands for var. So we want a capital D for deck and a capital V for var. Now, obviously, we do not use spaces in names or variables within code. So no spaces, but instead we have capital letters. Alright, so now that you've named that btn deck var, let's scroll down here to text and give it the text declaring variables. And then, much like when we had the form selected, the properties box controls all the settings for that button. The properties box will control the settings of whatever you have selected. So now that we've created that button, what we need to do is come up to our Solution Explorer, and I want you to right click Visual Studio Demo. Right click it, and if we go down to Add, we have two options. We're going to either click either New Item or Form bracket Windows Forms. Windows Forms is the easier one. This is easier, simpler, so if you have it, click it, but I will do New Item for those that don't. So New Item. Now we've got to pick our type of item from this list. We want Form, then we're going to give it a name down the bottom. Now it's ideal that you name it when you create the form. It's a little bit easier. I believe older versions of Visual Studio actually let you name this form when you create your application, but this one doesn't. So we will get to name our forms whenever we add one though. So in this case we will be calling it FRM, that stands for Form Deck var. Now click Add. Now we have a new form. We actually have opened into that new form too, so we've now looking at Form Deck var. Now to switch back to the main form that we were working on, if we go over to Solution Explorer and double click Main, it'll take us back. So back on the main form, we want to double click our button, which will take us to this code view. Now this code view is where you'll spend most of your time in Visual Studio. It's obviously where the meat and potatoes of coding and app creation will be, and it's where all the logic is going to be. So for this, what we need to do is we want this button to open that new form we created. So what we're going to do is type in form with a capital F, because it's a command, and then FRM Deck var. Now we want to press equals and type in new Form Deck var with the brackets and then a semicolon. Semicolon should go at the end of each line. It does signify the end of a sequence of code. Now that we've done that, we want to hit enter and do frm deck var dot show, and then the brackets again, and there we go. Now let's see what this does. Now to run the application, we go up here and click start, and it'll run our app. So let's see what our code does. Let's click the button, and yes, it opens up this new form. So we're done with that. Let's close that. Now that we've done that, how would we close a form? Well, it's very similar. So let's just resize that and let's grab a new button. And instead of dragging into that group box, we're going to drag it below like so. And we're going to call this one under name BTN close. Okay. Call it text exit. Like so. Now we'll double click it, and again it creates this piece of code for us, and in between these two brackets we can insert our code. And this code is actually extremely simple. All we need to do is type in this dot close and then brackets. Put a semicolon and we're done. So let's test this then. Click start Deck variables. Yep, that still works. Excellent. Now let's click exit. And there we go. Exit it. So that's quite simple. That's how you switch in between forms and create new forms in Visual Studio. Now, a few things I'll like to specify. Whenever you click a button, if we throw in a new button, we won't name this one, we'll just delete it once we're done. We create that, double click it. It injects this code. This is an event code. That event is responsible for whatever happens when you click that button. And any code that happens in here, in this spot here, is what will happen when that button is clicked. So it's quite fair, it's actually quite simple. And I think that's all we need to cover today. So in the next tutorial, I will touch on, we'll be filling out that form we created and declaring some variables. Alright, so I will see you in the next video.